Where have the New York Giants gone wrong in building up the franchise into a winner? We take a look at the biggest missteps, not just this year, but in years past that have all come back to haunt the franchise. That's coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traynor, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. It is appreciated. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is being brought to you in part by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, folks, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, look, the Giants' record is what it is. It hasn't been a very good season. It hasn't been a very good decade for this team. It's just been an absolute disaster. And in reflecting over it, I thought I would go back and I would look at some of the biggest decisions that I think were game changers, if you will, for the Giants in building up the franchise, continuing the continuity that they had back in 2011, 2012, when they were still a good team, and just the mistakes over the years that have just really impacted this team, and mistakes that they just haven't recovered from. So that's going to be what we cover today. Again, welcome on into everybody, and let's jump right in. All right. So the first thing, obviously, we have to take a look at is the quarterback situation. Now, a lot of you are going to say, well, Daniel Jones, right? Folks, actually, the quarterback situation, you can go back to, you could go back a few years. You could go back to 2017 when the Giants, they reportedly were looking to get Patrick Mahomes in the draft. And for whatever the reason, they didn't do enough to move up to get Patrick Mahomes. That year, the Giants drafted 23rd, if I remember correctly. They ended up staying put and taking Evan Ingram. Meanwhile, the Kansas City Chiefs put together a series of moves to get up to get Patrick Mahomes. Now, part of that was Eli Manning was still the quarterback at the time. Now, you guys know that I have long been an Eli Manning fan. I just think, for all he has done for the franchise, he's a Hall of Famer in my book. He should be in the Hall of Fame. And in my opinion, and this is kind of surprising because growing up, I was always a big Phil Simms fan, but I can honestly say in my lifetime, Eli Manning has been the best quarterback that I have ever had the pleasure of seeing play for this franchise. But at the time, like I said, the Giants had Eli Manning. Eli was 36 years old at the time, and he was coming off one of his less than good seasons. I think at the time, he was averaging 6.7 yards per pass attempt, his worst of his career at that particular moment. Now, again, the Giants, if you remember, they had Ben McAdoo as their head coach. Ben McAdoo was absolutely in love with Patrick Mahomes, wanted to get him in the worst way. Jerry Reese, who was the GM at the time, just didn't or couldn't make it happen. So what happened? They stuck with Eli, all right? And the following year, 2018, they had an opportunity to help Eli, all right? They could have traded the number 2 pick to get more offensive line help, and they didn't. They took Saquon Barkley with the idea of having a good running game would help Eli. And it did in a way, but it didn't. Now, also in 2018, if you remember, there were reports, and these I can tell you are true, that the Giants were hoping to get Justin Herbert, who at the time was the Oregon quarterback. Well, Justin Herbert went back to school, as we all know. So that left the Giants scrambling in a nutshell. So the following year, what happens? The Giants are drafting in the top of the first round again. You know, in the first, they had the sixth overall pick. And what did they do? Folks, they made a panic move. All right. It came down to Josh Allen or Daniel Jones in 2019. Now, Dave Gettleman, the GM at the time, was actually contemplating taking Josh Allen, who's the outside linebacker now for the Jaguars. He was actually contemplating this. But he took Daniel Jones. Why? Because the feeling was twofold. Actually, there's two reasons. Number one, there were grumblings that teams behind the Giants were looking to get Daniel Jones in the first round, one of which I believe was Washington, who, if I remember correctly, they had the 15th overall pick. The Giants had 2 first-round picks that year, and that Washington was reportedly looking to get Daniel Jones. So the Giants didn't think Daniel would make it down to 17. So Dave Gettleman basically panicked. He said, okay, you know what? I like what I saw of him in the Senior Bowl, like what I saw of him in the at the combine. Let's just pull the trigger. We know we need a quarterback. We know he's, the guy that we want. Let's take him at number 6. So they did. And, the problem with what the Giants did in taking the quarterback is that, Daniel Jones was a fit for the head coach at the time, Pat Shurmur, for his system. And Pat Shurmur actually got a lot out of Daniel Jones as a rookie. But here's the danger in letting a GM/head coach combination pick your next franchise quarterback. Unless you're going to surround that guy with stability, the same system, the same play caller, the same philosophy, you're running the risk of ruining that guy. Okay, so that's the problem the Giants now face with the quarterback situation. Do they stay with Joe Shane and Brian Dable? And by the way, I know that there have been reports that they're not a package deal. I think it makes sense to keep them as a package deal. If you're going to get rid of one, get rid of the other. Don't say, oh, we're going to keep one guy and get rid of the other, even though I think that's the way it's going based on, again, what I've been hearing. So that's the problem you face, because look, if you keep, say, for example, Joe Shane, now, you bring in a new head coach, and you let that head coach help pick the quarterback. Are they really going to be on the same page? Are you going to have are you going to be divided? And then if, God forbid, the Giants aren't better next year, if they keep Joe Shane but get rid of Dable, now what do? Do you keep Shane, or do you get rid of him and bring in a new GM? So you face a vicious cycle. That is why I constantly say that if the Giants had the opportunity to sweep everybody out and start from scratch after a bad season or bad series of seasons, you do it. All right. So the Giants, for the last 2 years, they haven't had a good season. They haven't looked as though they have improved. They look like they've regressed. If you're going to make a move, if you're the ownership and you're going to make a move, you sweep everybody out. You've already swept out the quarterback. You sweep out the GM and the head coach. You don't just do halfsies on this one. But again, all the tea leaves that I've been reading suggest that will not necessarily be the case. That, ownership will, try to exercise patience with the plan that has been put in place. What that plan is exactly, I'm not really sure, but that's how I think it's going to happen. That's not to be clear, that's not how I'm saying I would do it, but that's how I think it's going to play out. All right. So I just want to make that clear that, if you're going to make a change and you have a chance to start over and just start from scratch, you do it. And I've said on past shows, I understand why they wouldn't, but, you got to look at it with eyes wide open. And there's pros and cons to keeping the current regime. It's all what ownership deems to be most important. But definitely, you look at the big mistakes as to why this team has deteriorated over the years. You got to look at the quarterback. That is mistake number one, front and center. All right. Now, there are 4 other mistakes that I have that I want to talk about. So I will give you the next 2 right after this. Hey, Giant fans, Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better. And it's also the perfect gift. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And if you find tickets elsewhere in the same section and row for less, Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. So go on and get the tickets you want. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And I hope everybody, by the way, those of you who celebrate Christmas or whatever holidays you're celebrating this time of year, I hope everybody had a nice holiday. We were off yesterday. We're back, obviously. And next week on the Locked On Giants podcast, of course, we will have takeaways from the Giants-Colts game. I know a lot of you are like, keep the losing going, keep the quote-unquote tanking going. So, that, of course, we'll have takeaways there. And then also coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast, it is my hope to have the one and only, the fantastic Steve Kirby on the program. Steve Kirby and I, we've known each other for a long time, and I want to get some of his takes on the Giants and, the direction the franchise is headed, where it might be going, and also talk about Eli Manning and his candidacy for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, because that decision is going to have to be made sooner than later, next month, as a matter of fact. So those are just some of the topics that I hope to cover with Steve Kirby, and that show is tentatively set for Tuesday if you want to check that out. So hope you will. All right, let's get back to why the Giants have deteriorated. And again, I'm trying to look at bigger picture, not just this year. So I wrote down Saquon Barkley on my sheet. Now, a couple things here. I don't necessarily disagree with the concept of letting Saquon Barkley go, because, look, the money was used to fix the offensive line and whatnot. But see, here's the problem I have with this whole Saquon Barkley thing. And this is also a problem that you can kind of extend to some other guys who have walked out the door. And that is these guys, in my opinion, have been looked at as pure business decisions. Not necessarily, okay, what else do they bring to the table besides maybe their play on the field, and what exactly is their value? And if there's one thing that the current Giants regime of Joe Schoen has really not done a good job of, in my opinion, and that is assigning an overall value to a player. If he's not overvaluing a guy, he's undervaluing a guy. So what do I mean by that? Well, with Saquon, I always go back to what we learned in Hard Knocks and how they did this study that running backs over the age of 27 tend to lose their juice. Okay? I have spoken about this before. I'm not a fan of those types of studies, but here we are. The biggest thing, though, is the leadership that walked out the door, so you lose a Xavier McKinney, which I understand, they weren't going to pay him $17 million a year. You lose a Julian Love. You lose a Saquon Barkley. These are all guys, a Leonard Williams who you trade away. These are all guys who brought leadership to your locker room. And now what are you doing? You're like saying, well, they're not my guys. I didn't bring them in here, so I'm going to replace them with my guys. Sometimes you don't have to fix what's not broken. But yet, that's what happened with valuing these guys. Now, also to that end, Saquon Barkley, you tell Saquon, go out and test the market, get a deal, and we'll figure out if we want to match it. How about being proactive and saying, okay, this is what we think you're worth. If you want to go out and get another deal, great. Give us a chance to match it. If we can, we can. If we can't, we can't. I would have felt a heck of a lot better with how things went down with Saquon had the Giants taken that approach. All right. The Azeez Ojulari situation, when the Giants had an opportunity to trade the guy and Joe Shane kind of dug his heels in and wanted, I believe it was a 4th-round pick. Wouldn't take anything lower than a 4th from what I heard. You've got to learn how to value guys. When you start overvaluing guys and undervaluing guys, that's going to get your franchise in trouble. And ladies and gentlemen, lo and behold, look at where the Giants are, right? So that, to me, is a big issue. Now, whether that is just pure inexperience on the part of Joe Shane, who is now in his finishing up his 3rd season as a GM, whether that is stubbornness, I don't know. But I do know that that's something moving forward I would like to see the Giants front office do a better job of. And that is valuing guys, assessing value of to guys. All right? Because it's just, you can't keep letting leadership walk out the door. It's, you're talking about building a culture. Well, how are you supposed to build a culture if you're letting your leaders walk out the door because, oh, I don't value this position, or, oh, this guy wants too much money? I mean, think about it, folks. Saquon Barkley ended up signing with the Eagles for only $1 million more in guaranteed money than he did with the Giants. And you wonder, had they maybe been a little bit more forthcoming with the guaranteed money, not this past offseason, but the offseason before when they were going back and forth, you wonder if maybe something could have been done. Who knows? All right, the next thing on my list that I think has caused the Giants to deteriorate, we've had a few head coaches that have just decided to be play callers. All right, Pat Shurmur decided to be his own play caller. Ben McAdoo decided to be his own play caller. And Brian Dable now, this year, decided to be his own play caller. Now, look, I get it that in some cases it works. Andy Reid is a perfect example of making it work. Okay, you could make the case that Sean McVay is a good example of making it work. You could make a case for Kyle Shanahan for making it work. But of course, you have to have the talent to make it work. When you do not have the talent like that, then it becomes an uphill battle. I have not really been a fan of head coaches calling their own plays for this Giants team. This Giants team, in my opinion, has not been built up, not just this year, but in years past. And you just kind of like to see the head coach, in my opinion, at any rate, you like to see the head coach spend the necessary time to make sure everything's running smoothly. And for me, I don't know, head coach taking on the play calling duties, that's more of an ego trip. And I'm just not a fan of it. Look, I understand that, what Dable was thinking. He probably figured, okay, look, if I take over the play calling and Kafka leaves, the offensive coordinator, there's going to be continuity. Well, it was going to be the same system regardless, assuming that Dable was back. It's the same system. So, and we've seen that the Giants' offense is actually worse with Dable calling the plays. And this was even before the injuries, even before they cut Daniel Jones. The Giants' offense couldn't score. So really, what did they gain here? The answer is nothing. And it just hasn't worked for this team when they have had the head coach calling the plays. It just doesn't work. All right? So, moving forward, if Dable is retained, and right now I don't know that he will be, but if he is retained, I would like to see him get an offensive coordinator and give that person the play calling duties. Go back to being a CEO style head coach. Will that happen? I think if it does, he will probably need to be coaxed to give it up. But I think it needs to happen because it just hasn't worked this year. And I get it. Maybe Brian figured, okay, if I'm going to go down with the ship, I'm going to go down piloting it. Fine. Well, you know what? You might be going down after making this decision. So, okay, I've got a couple more for you that I want to talk about. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with those last few items as to why the New York Giants have deteriorated over the years. Hey, Giant fans, time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free online courses, including literature, mathematics, fine arts, history, economics, and so much more. There's no better way to expand your knowledge and challenge your mind than to open it to learning something new from Hillsdale College's vast catalog of online courses. Enroll today for free at hillsdale.edu/lockedon. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. Again, that's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we're taking a look at reasons why the New York Giants as a franchise have deteriorated over the years. And it's not just decisions or lack thereof that were made this year. I'm going back a few years in some cases to look at how things set up the franchise for where they are today. So let's continue on. I told you I had a couple of others. I actually have three more. So just real quick, depth at key positions, cornerback, D-line, O-line. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And I want to specifically talk about the D-line and the O-line, or not building from the inside out. Now, this is a problem in my mind that has gone back to Jerry Reese. All right, I think of I think it was 2010. And I remember Kevin Gilbride reading in an article, Kevin Gilbride begging management, Jerry Reese, the GM at the time, begging him to start getting him new offensive linemen because he saw that the guys that he had, that great offensive line from 2007 through 2010, he saw they were starting to age and deteriorate a little bit. And Gilbride had asked for new offensive linemen because he wanted to get them ready and have them ready to step in so that when those guys got older and couldn't do the job anymore, they would not miss a beat. But what did Jerry Reese do? He didn't draft an offensive line with a premium pick until I think it was 2013 when he took Justin Pugh. So he let several years go by before spending a premium pick on an offensive lineman. And you know what, folks? The offensive line has been pretty much a mess ever since. Okay? Now, I want to look for a moment at the Philadelphia Eagles, who, in my opinion, right now have the best offensive line in the NFL. Howie Roseman, their GM, has been with the team since 2000, and he's, been the GM for 2010 to 2014 and 2019 through present. Okay, let's take a look at the 2019 through present era of Howie Roseman's regime here. Every year, Howie Roseman has picked at least one offensive lineman or a defensive lineman. All right, so he's picked 4 offensive linemen, 3 defensive linemen. And folks, not just 5th round picks or day 3 picks. We're talking premium picks. Premium picks to me are picks made in days 1 or 2. All right, so rounds 1 through 3 is what we're talking about. So is it any wonder that the Eagles have such a good offensive line and a good defensive line? It's because they devote the resources to build that unit up. And, look, a guy ages or retires, they have a guy waiting in the wings who's been developed, ready to step in. Can we say the Giants have had that? Absolutely not. And it's been a huge, huge mistake. I mean, this past year, what did Joe Shane do in the draft? We're all applauding him for the great draft class that he had. And it is a good draft class, don't get me wrong. But there was no offensive lineman and no defensive lineman in the group. So now what? Do you have a swing tackle on your roster? No. Do you have, depth along the interior? Maybe. You might say Jake Kubas, maybe you could make that case. Pretty much you've got veterans. You don't really have any young talent in the pipeline. And if you are Joe Schoen and you're sitting there and saying, in your introductory press conference, our goal is to draft and develop, why aren't you adding to the most important part of your team, which is the trenches? Without the play in the trenches, you don't stand a chance, and it doesn't matter who your quarterback is. So I really don't understand why they haven't done it, but I think it's been a mistake. And it's a mistake, like I said, that goes back to the era of Jerry Reese. So that has helped contribute to the Giants' downfall. Okay, I'm going to give you one more before I call it a day. Doubling down on mistakes. And again, I'm going to go back to the Jerry Reese era. Anybody remember when he was asked about Eric Flowers versus Andrew Whitworth and why he didn't go for Andrew Whitworth? And how he basically doubled down and said that, they believed in Eric Flowers as their left tackle? Anybody remember that? I remember sitting in the Giants auditorium, and when he said that, I was like, what? Did he really just say that? But that's a case of doubling down on a mistake. You want another case? More recent? Evan Neal. All right? They keep insisting he is an offensive tackle. Folks, I don't think the kid's an offensive tackle. He tries, but I just don't see the balance. I just don't see the consistency. Would some of his problems that he has playing tackle, would that be mitigated if they moved him inside to guard? I think it might. But no, let's double down because Evan Neal was the 7th overall pick, and you can't have a guard as your 7th overall pick. Hey, there's nothing wrong with admitting you made a mistake and fixing it, trying to salvage it. But so far the team hasn't done it. Now this year I get it. Evan Neal missed all of the spring and most of the summer because he had that setback from his ankle surgery. But there hasn't been something in the tape that told them that maybe the idea was to move Evan Neal to guard. And P.S., if Evan Neal is back on this roster next year, which I believe he will be, I wouldn't be shocked if he's playing guard. All right, which would just underscore the belief that, what I and others have been saying about him being a better candidate for a guard. One more I'll give you. Josh Azudu, sweetheart of a guy. But why are you playing him at tackle? I get it. Okay, cross-train and all that's good stuff. But is tackle really his best position? You could cross-train people all you want. But at some point you have to recognize what their best position is, what their strengths are, and what their weaknesses are. And if you're going to put somebody at a spot where they're maybe not suited for that spot, you're setting them up to fail. You're setting them up to sabotage their confidence. So this doubling down on decisions just to prove that you were right, it's come back to bite them, plain and simple. So, I think the first step overall, just to summarize, is just to acknowledge some of these mistakes. Go back and look. History is our greatest teacher. We should know we need to learn from our mistakes, Giants included. And I know, look, if you were to ask Joe Schoen about the mistakes of the past, you'd say, well, that was before I got here. But there are lessons to be learned there. And if Joe Schoen is back, and again, I believe he will be, based on reading the tea leaves from things I've heard and whatnot, but, that's not set in stone. But if he is back, let's hope that he learns from his mistakes because they have contributed to the franchise being where it's at right now. And it's a dang shame, folks, because there's talent on this roster. This team could have been a lot better. But the mistakes of the past just continue to haunt them. So we'll see if ownership decides to exorcise the ghosts or if they continue with their head in the sand, making the same mistakes again next year. Hopefully they won't, but who knows? All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in, spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, don't forget to tune in next week. Monday, I'll have takeaways and some general thoughts from the Giants-Colts game. Tuesday, hopefully, I will have Steve Serby on. Wednesday, of course, is New Year's Day. I will be off that day. We'll have Crossover Thursday, our final one of the year with the Locked On Eagles co-host Gino and Louie. I think I'm going to have Louie on with me that one. And then we'll wrap things up next Friday, the last Friday before the final regular season game of the 2024 season. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll see you on Monday.